There is a particular shade of cream, the color of good wedding icing, that I never expected to fear. But there it was, sitting on my counter at 5 in the morning, propped against the register like it had been waiting all night for me to notice it. Before we go any further, if stories like this one move you, take 1 second right now and hit subscribe. Because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that stays with you long after the lights go out. My name is Marin Ellison. I'm 31 years old. And I own a small bakery called Ellison and Rye, on the corner of a street most people only find because someone told them to. I built this place with flour-dusted hands and a stubbornness nobody gave me. I earned it myself. My husband, Theo, builds furniture 2 doors down. Most mornings, he brings me coffee before either of us says a word, because he's learned that I don't have words yet, not until the first tray is in the oven. Our daughter, Ren, is 1 year old. She has a laugh like a hiccup, and when I hold her, I understand, all over again, why I never went looking for anyone else. The people who raised me are Ruth and Walter. They are not the ones who gave birth to me. They are the ones who stayed. They sold me this bakery for $1 and a promise to keep their sourdough starter alive. That's the kind of family we are. Small jokes. Big love. No math involved. Ruth's heart has been giving her trouble lately. Little flutters. The doctor watches. Walter pretends not to worry by rearranging the flower pots on the porch, over and over, like if he keeps his hands busy enough, nothing bad can happen. That morning, I turned on the ovens first. That's what you do. You don't open a letter before the bread goes in. The shop smelled like yeast and cold sugar, the way it always does before sunrise. And the envelope sat there, the color of joy, written in a hand I hadn't seen in 20 years. I told myself I'd open it after the rush. I did not open it after the rush. Here is what I know about the people who gave me away. Almost nothing. And I built an entire life on top of that nothing. I was 3 years old when they signed the papers. Old enough to have one memory. Or maybe just the ghost of one. A woman's hands buttoning my coat too fast. A car door. Cold vinyl under my legs. Ruth told me the truth when I was 10, because she believed that lies rot a family from the inside out. She said my birth parents had wanted a son, and could only raise one child well. So they chose. She didn't soften it. She just held my hand while I did the math no child should ever have to do. When I was 11, a woman called our house once. Asked for me by a name I didn't recognize. Then never called again. Walter cried in the pantry that night, thinking I couldn't hear him. That was the whole relationship. One buttoned coat. One phone call. 20 years of silence I had finally stopped checking for. I used to imagine, when I was younger, that somewhere, my mother was crying too. Then I grew up, and I stopped imagining. Because imagining is a bill you pay with your own peace. I taught myself to bake instead. Bread doesn't ask if you are wanted. Bread just needs warmth, and time, and someone paying attention. I could give it all 3. And then, one Tuesday, that cream-colored envelope showed up on my counter, and the button coat feeling came back like it had never left at all. I opened it after the morning rush, in the back room, where the mixer drowns out most feelings. Dearest Ren, it began. My stomach dropped through the floor, because that wasn't my name. It was the name on a birth certificate I have never once held. She wrote that she thought of me every day. That fate had put me back in her heart. And then, 3 paragraphs in, wrapped in so much velvet I nearly missed the blade underneath it, she asked for $40,000. Not for herself, she was careful to say. For my brother. His name was Julian. 19 years old. Full of promise. College was so expensive now. And family. She underlined the word. Family helps family. She signed it, your mother, Corinne. As if the word were a fact, instead of something you have to earn. I sat on an upturned flour bucket and read it twice. $40,000, from a woman who once decided I was the affordable one to let go. My hands were steady. And I noticed that I noticed, because steady hands, in a moment like that, means something in you has already gone quiet, and careful, and cold. She wanted money. That part was simple. But she had signed the letter with a name she gave away the same day she gave me away. And that told me the money was only the doorway. The account she'd opened when I was 3 years old. She still believed it was open. And she had come to make a withdrawal. My first answer was no. It came up clean and fast, before guilt could even get its shoes on. I called my friend Sana on my lunch break, because Sana is a paralegal, and because she tells me the truth even when it costs me a slice of pie. I read her the letter, standing in the alley behind the shop, my apron still on. When an adoption is finalized, Marin, she said, it legally severs the relationship completely. They are not your parents in any way the law recognizes. You owe them nothing. No money. No explanation. No reply. I remember a delivery truck idling at the end of the alley, and thinking, so that's it, then. It's over. But Sana wasn't finished. Legally, sure, she said. But you and I both know that's not the account she's trying to collect on. I didn't answer. Because she was right. And because that account had no laws protecting it. Only the soft, hopeful part of me that had spent 20 years wondering if a mother somewhere had cried. That part didn't care what the law said. That part was already reaching for a pen. That night, at the kitchen table, with Ren asleep upstairs and Theo pretending to read beside me, I wrote back. Short. Kind. Because kindness was the only boundary I could actually hold. I told her I had a full life. I told her I wouldn't be sending money. I signed it Marin. Not your daughter. Then I found the number at the bottom of the letter, the one meant for arranging the transfer, and I blocked it. Theo watched me do it. He's not a man who tells me how to feel. He just put his hand over mine and said, you don't owe that woman a single thing. And if she comes at you, she comes at both of us. I believed him. I slept that night like a door had finally closed. But I need to be honest about the part I'm not proud of, because you came here for honesty. Even while I wrote the refusal, another voice inside me was already doing the arithmetic. 40,000 was a lot. It was also survivable for a woman who'd built something real. And if one check made the guilt disappear, if it let me be the generous one, the one who rose above it all, then maybe it was worth it, just to be done. I almost wrote that check, just to make the guilt stop. If you've ever paid for peace that never actually arrived, you already know exactly where this story is going. Stay with me. I mailed the refusal. And the next afternoon, Ruth's phone rang. Her voice had a thin thread in it I hadn't heard since her last visit to the cardiologist. A woman had called the house. Someone she didn't know, asking for Ren. Walter told her there was no Ren at that number. And the woman said, oh, but there is. She just goes by something else now, doesn't she? And how's the bakery doing? My hand tightened on the pastry bag until the seam split. Corinne had our home number. Not my cell, which I could block. The old number, in the old phone book, the one you can find if you know a last name and a town. And she knew about the bakery. I had told her nothing. I had blocked her. And still, she was reaching past me, through me, toward the people I would burn down the whole building to protect. I kept my voice level for Ruth's sake. But my heart was doing something fast and ugly. Because a stranger who accepts no walks away. A stranger who circles behind you, hunting for the softest people in your life, she isn't asking anymore. She's measuring the walls. Looking for the windows somebody left open. That evening, I did some looking of my own. Because I would rather know the shape of a thing than be ambushed by it. It didn't take long to see the pattern. The letter had arrived 6 weeks after our bakery was featured in the regional paper. A little article about the local shop that had quadrupled its wedding orders. A photo of me, grinning, holding a 3-tier cake like a fool. 20 years of silence. And then the exact moment I looked solvent, the moment I looked worth it, a letter arrives, calling me dearest. I sat with that for a long time. Because it meant the silence had never really been silence. It had been patience. She hadn't forgotten me and then remembered. She had been watching, from a distance, waiting for the girl she gave away to grow into something worth coming back for. I wasn't a daughter she'd lost. I was an investment she had deferred. The only question left was, who had been feeding her the reports? 2 days later, a second envelope arrived. Same cream color. Inside was a photograph. A boy, 19, standing in front of a brick building, hands in his pockets, half a smile. The kind of smile you give when someone else told you to smile. Julian. My brother. A word that landed strange in my chest, because I had never had a sibling, and here was a stranger wearing my birth mother's chin. Corinne's note was shorter this time, and sharper for it. Julian didn't know she was writing, she said. He was proud. He would never ask for help himself. But he was the family's hope. He needs you, she wrote. Your brother needs you. She had learned, in the space between letters, that pleading for herself bounced off me. So she swapped ammunition, and put the boy in front of the money like a shield, because she knew, the way predators know, that I would never fire through a child. It worked. A little. I looked at that practiced half-smile for a long time. But I've piped enough wedding cakes to know the difference between a bride's real joy and the smile she gives the photographer on the count of 3. Julian's smile was the second kind. I turned the photograph over. Because I turn everything over. It's a baker's habit. You always check the bottom of the tray. On the back, in different handwriting, was a return address. Not Corinne's city, 3 hours away. A house 1 county over from mine. My Aunt Isla's house. I had met Isla exactly twice, both times by accident, both times through Ruth, who kept one thin thread of contact with my birth family, the way you keep a spare key you hope you never have to use. Isla had always seemed like the neutral one. The aunt who sent a Christmas card and asked no questions. The border town between 2 countries at war. And her handwriting was on the back of a photograph my birth mother had used to break my boundary. I called her the next morning. Not to accuse. Just to listen. Because people who think you don't know anything, they will tell you everything. Oh, honey, it's been so long, Isla said, warm as ever. How's that beautiful baby? I asked, gently, if she'd heard from Corinne lately. There was a pause. The kind a person takes when the true answer and the safe answer are fighting in their throat. Well, you know how she frets over you, Isla said. I keep telling her you turned out just fine. I send her little updates so she stops worrying. She said it like a kindness. She had just handed me the map, and she believed she was doing me a favor. For years, she admitted, since I was a teenager, Corinne would call and ask how I was doing. And Isla would relay whatever Ruth had told her. When I got into the baking program. When Theo and I married. When the shop opened. When Ren was born. She just wants to know you're happy, Isla said. I listened to a woman describe, in the voice of someone recounting a good deed, how she had spent a decade as a pipeline, feeding every private detail of my life to the person I had been protected from. She's your mother, Marin, Isla said, when I went quiet. Blood is blood. And there it was. The whole machine, folded into a single tidy sentence, said by a woman who genuinely believed she was the gentle one. She wasn't cruel. That was almost the worst part. She simply believed that family was a debt that overrode any door you tried to close. I asked her, as evenly as I could, to please stop sending Corinne anything about me or my daughter. There was a long, hurt silence. The silence of someone who cannot understand why you'd refuse a favor. Well, if that's what you want, she said finally. Then, softer and terrible. But honey, you can't really stop your mother. She's already decided. Cutting Isla off cost more than I expected. She wasn't a villain. She was the last thin thread to a whole side of myself I never got to know. The aunt who might have told me stories about grandparents, about where my hands came from. When I asked her to stop, I felt that thread snap. And I stood in my kitchen holding a dead phone, a little more alone than I'd been that morning. Nobody tells you this part. Protecting yourself doesn't feel like winning. It feels like subtraction. Every wall you build to keep the harmful ones out also keeps out the maybe good ones standing behind them. Theo found me still standing there and didn't ask what happened. He just started dinner. Because he's learned that sometimes the kindest thing is to fill the room with the smell of onions and let a person come back to herself in their own time. Over the stove, he said only one thing. She warned you, didn't she? That Corinne's already decided. I nodded. Then decide back, he said. Not louder. Just first. It was good advice. I would spend the next several weeks failing to take it, because Corinne, having lost her pipeline, did not slow down. She got in her car. I sat Ruth and Walter down at the same kitchen table where I'd learned to crack eggs one-handed, and I told them everything. The letters. The money. Isla. I told them a woman named Corinne might come to their door, and if she did, they were not to let her in. Not even to be polite. Not even for a minute. Walter went quiet and stern, the way he does when a machine breaks and he's already fixing it in his head. But Ruth went pale in a way I didn't like, one hand drifting to her chest. "Marin, honey," she said, in a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from her. "Is this going to be all right?" I hated Corinne, right then, more than I had for any letter, because I was watching a woman with a fragile heart absorb a fear she had unearned. I should have noticed, that day, how quiet Ruth went when I mentioned Corinne might call the house again. She didn't say that awful woman, the way I expected. She looked down at her hands instead. At the time, I told myself it was fear. I should have asked what she wasn't saying. I didn't. I was too busy building walls to notice one of them already had a crack. She came on a Thursday. My quiet day. Which is exactly what let me see her. I was frosting lemon cakes near the front window when a clean sedan parked across the street. The kind of car people buy to look established. A woman got out. Late 50s. A coat too nice for our little downtown. I knew her before I knew her. The way you recognize your own chin on a stranger. She stood on the far sidewalk and studied my shop the way you look at a house you used to live in. She didn't come in. That was the part that iced my spine. She just looked, for a long minute, at the gold letters spelling my bakery's name on the glass. At me, behind the counter, piping bag in hand, and something moved across her face I couldn't read and didn't want to. Then she got back in the car and drove away. An hour later, Ruth called, her voice shaking. A woman had left an envelope in her mailbox. Cream-colored. Addressed to Ren. Corinne had driven 3 hours, looked at the daughter she'd given away, decided not to speak to her, and delivered her demand instead to the one door I could never afford to leave unguarded. I caught up to her sedan at the light before the highway, because our town is small and there's only one road out past the feed store. I rolled my window down. For the first time in 28 years, I looked my birth mother in the eye. "Ren," she breathed, like a prayer answered. "My name is Marin," I said. "And you need to stop going to my parents' house." She flinched, just slightly, a card player who'd been read. Then she recovered, and did the thing she does, the thing I'd only seen on paper until now. Her voice went gentle, and laid a hook in every sentence. "I only want what's best for this family," she said. "I gave you a better life than I could offer. All I'm asking is you help your brother the way I made sure you'd be helped. I gave you up so you could rise. Don't you think you owe the family that gave you the chance?" The light turned green. A truck honked behind us. And there, in one breath, at a traffic light in my own town, Corinne said the entire thesis of her life out loud, calm as scripture. She had reframed abandonment as a gift. She had turned giving me away into an investment she was now cashing in. "That's not how it works," I said, and rolled up my window. But through the glass, I caught her last words. "About my daughter. That's my grandbaby too," she said. It shouldn't have shaken me. It was just biology. A technicality. The same technicality that let her sign a letter your mother. But it did shake me, because it revealed the true size of what she wanted. She didn't want $40,000. That was the opening bid. She wanted back in. A standing claim on my life, my parents, my daughter. A permanent seat at a table I had built specifically so people like her could never sit at it. That night, sitting on the nursery floor while Ren slept, I let myself feel how tired I was. Theo sat beside me and said only, "We're okay," over and over, until I could breathe. And in the quiet, the old voice made its offer again, so reasonable, so seductive. "Just pay her $40,000 and it's over. You can afford it. Be the bigger person." I was so worn down, I almost decided to do it, just to make it stop. Then my phone lit up. The bakery's after-hours line. Nobody calls that at night. It was Walter. His voice was wrong. "Marin, your mother's in the hospital." I don't remember the drive. Only the parking lot. Only running. Ruth was in a bed with wires on her chest, small in a way I refused to accept. Walter sat in the corner, looking a decade older than he had that morning. A mild cardiac event, the doctor said. Caught early. She'd be fine, with rest, and no stress. He said those two words, no stress, while looking at a chart, not knowing he'd just prescribed the one thing my family could no longer guarantee. In the hallway, Walter told me what happened. Corinne had come to the house that afternoon, after the mailbox. She'd knocked. And Ruth, my Ruth, who I'd told 100 times not to open the door, had opened it. Because Ruth is polite, and because Corinne had said the one thing that got past every wall. You've had her 30 years. I only want a little help for my son. You owe me the daughter you got to keep. She had gone to a woman with a failing heart and called her a thief. And Ruth had stood in her own doorway and absorbed the accusation until her chest seized. I sat by her bed all night. Near dawn, she woke, found my hand, and whispered something I will hear for the rest of my life. Don't let her take you from me, she said, as if I were the one being stolen. In the morning, gray light through the blinds, Ruth asked for the mail from home. Ordinary mail. Bills, a grocery flyer. Ordinary is what a scared person reaches for. And there, in the middle of it, was the cream envelope. Riding along by accident. Sitting now on my mother's lap in her hospital gown, her hand resting over it, shaking, not from the envelope, just from being 71 and tired and hooked to a monitor. I looked at that. My adoptive mother's trembling hand, lying over my birth mother's demand, in a hospital, at dawn. And something in me finished changing that had been changing all week. I had been fighting to keep my peace, hoping there was a version where everyone stayed calm, and I paid a fee, and it all went quiet. That version died on the blanket in front of me, because I finally understood the shape of what I was fighting. Corinne would never stop, and she would never come at me directly again, because she'd learned I was strong. She would come at Ruth. At Walter. At Ren, someday. She would keep aiming at the softest people I loved, because that was the only leverage that ever worked on a woman like me. I took the envelope off my mother's lap so she wouldn't have to hold it another second. And I made a decision that felt like stepping off a ledge. I was going to drive the 3 hours myself. Not to pay. To find out what that money was really for. Because whatever this was, it wasn't a boy's tuition. I was done letting her write the story from 3 hours away. 3 days later, I made the drive. Theo offered to come. I told him to stay and guard the house, because some things you have to walk into on your own 2 feet. I had one question, and it was simple. What is the money actually for? 40,000 isn't a round wish. It's a specific number. And specific numbers come from bills. I wanted to see the bill. Her neighborhood was tidy and tired. I parked across the street, the same way she'd parked across from my shop, and for 1 second, I understood the pull. To look, before you knock. Before I reached the door, it opened. A teenager came down the steps carrying a duffel bag. Tall. Unsure. A chin I'd have known anywhere, because I see it in my own mirror. We stood there. 2 strangers sharing a face on a cracked front walk. Can I help you? He said. And them nearly undid me, because he was my brother, calling me. My name is Marin, I said. I think Corinne is my mother too. The color drained out of his young face in real time. I had a sister, he said, more to himself than to me, testing the fact. Mom said, when I was little, there was a baby before me. A girl. But she said it didn't work out. It didn't work out. That was the phrase Corinne had given him for handing me to a stranger. Like a recipe. Like a business. A thing you try and abandon. I asked him, gently, if he was excited about college. He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. What college? And the whole cream-colored story Corinne had built cracked right down the middle, because the boy the money was supposedly for had never heard of it. He wasn't enrolled anywhere. Nobody had asked him about tuition. He'd finished high school in spring and wanted to do a welding apprenticeship. Something hands-on, something real. But his mother wanted a real school, and he didn't want to fight her. So mostly he'd just been working at the auto shop, hoping she'd let it drop. He had no idea a woman 3 hours away was being asked for $40,000 in his name. Mom does that, he said, so soft I almost missed it. She tells people things about me. The front door opened again, and Corinne stepped out, saw us standing together, and her face fell straight through the floor. For one unguarded second, I watched a woman whose two separate stories had just met each other in the yard. Then the mask slid back on. "Julian, honey, go put your bag inside and let me talk with our guest." Our guest. Not even a name, in front of him. She steered me inside with a hand on my elbow, chattering about coffee. I let her, because I wanted inside that house. I wanted to see the bills. While her back was turned filling the kettle, my eyes went where a baker's eyes always go, to the surfaces, the papers pushed to the edge of the table, where you shove the things you don't want a guest to see. Envelopes with plastic windows. The kind of mail that means someone owes someone. She stepped out to take a call. The second the screen door clapped shut, Julian slipped back into the kitchen, talking fast and low, the way you talk when a door might open any second. He told me the truth, because nobody had ever asked him for it. He didn't want college. He wanted the welding program 2 towns over. 9 months, hands-on, a real paycheck. He'd saved part of the cost himself. It was a fraction of 40,000. A small, honest number, for a small, honest dream. Every time he brought it up, his mother would get that look, and start talking about the sister who threw away her chances. Meaning me. The cautionary tale I'd become without ever being in the room. "So I'm the warning," I said. "Yeah. Kind of. Sorry." I looked at this kid across the table and finally saw the whole machine clearly. Corinne had 2 children. She'd discarded one for being a girl, and was crushing the other for being the boy she'd staked everything on. Different weapons. Same scale. We had maybe 9 minutes. We did the things siblings do in 9 minutes that should take 9 years. He told me he'd always felt watched, but never seen. I told him I'd always felt seen, but never wanted. He laughed, short and surprised. We got opposite halves of the same lousy deal. "Yeah," I said. "We did." "Quick," he whispered, before the screen door creaked again. "Look at the top one. It's not for me." I had maybe 10 seconds. It was enough, when you already know what you're looking for. Not a tuition statement. A past due notice, the amount circled in the same neat, looping hand that had written "Dearest Ren." Underneath, more of them. A collections letter. And at the bottom, a note about money promised at a cousin's wedding months back. Gift money Corinne had pledged in front of the whole family and never covered. A debt of face, as much as cash. The screen door announced her return, and I sat back just in time. But I had it now. The 40,000 was never Julian's education. It was Corinne's debts. Her collections. Her reputation, spent beyond what she could pay, wrapped in a boy's name because she knew I would never fire through a child. "So," she said, bright as anything, kettle screaming behind her, "have you thought about how you'd like to send it?" Right up until that question, I had been holding, in the back pocket of my mind, a compromise that felt almost noble. Send the money. Call it a gift to Julian, not to her. Rise above it. Be the generous one. Go home feeling like the good person I'd auditioned to be my entire life. That plan died at the kitchen table, with the bills 6 inches from my hand. Because there was no clean way to give her that money. Every dollar would go to the past due notice, the wedding debt, the reputation she was drowning to maintain. The exact machine that discarded me, now crushing my brother. If I paid, I wouldn't rise above the ledger my family lived by. I would be balancing its books. "I need to think," I said, and stood up to leave. Her face slipped, just for a second. The warmth curdled into something older and harder. "You think about everything, don't you?" she said. "Always the careful one." Then, low, almost to herself, "You owe me, Ren. I carried you. I gave you to people who could do better because I loved you enough to lose you. Do you know what that costs a mother? The least you can do is not let this family drown." I stood by her door with my keys in my hand and looked at this woman, who had just described abandoning her child as an act of love so profound it had earned interest for 30 years. She believed it. That was the thing that finally cooled all the heat out of me. She had told herself this story so many times it had become her bones. In her ledger, giving me up was a sacrifice, and a sacrifice creates a debt. And the debt was mine to pay, because I was the one who'd gotten the better life she'd generously arranged. I told the family you'd help, she said. At the reunion, I told them my daughter would take care of things. So you see, you have to. Because if you don't, well, they'll all know what kind of person you turned out to be. She had spent my name before she ever asked. And now she meant to collect in public. Sunday. A reunion at her house. The whole extended family. Aunts, cousins, Isla, the wedding people she owed, all gathered to eat. And, though she didn't say it this way, to witness. She had built a room. A private no, she could survive. But a daughter who refused her mother in front of the whole family, who let the family drown when she could have saved it. That daughter would be branded, and the shame would do the collecting her letters couldn't. You'll come, she said. It wasn't a question. Because if you don't, Ren, I'll simply have to tell them the story myself. My version. How the daughter I sacrificed everything for grew up cold and turned her back on the family that gave her the chance. She smiled. You're a businesswoman now. You know how much a reputation is worth. I drove home 3 hours in the dark, and I did not fall apart. Instead, something in me got very clear, and very level. The way a kitchen gets at 4 in the morning before anyone else is awake. She'd built a room. Fine. I would decide what happened in it. Theo was up when I got home, light on like a lighthouse. You're going to go, aren't you? He said. To the reunion. Yes. You don't have to walk into a room she built to trap you. He was right, about her. But somewhere on that dark highway, I'd stopped thinking about her at all. I wasn't going for Corinne. I was going for Julian. Because there was a boy in that house with a welding brochure hidden in a drawer, and a mother turning him into a bill. And I was the only person alive who understood both ends of that particular trap. The next morning, before the ovens were even warm, I called Sana, and someone else. And I started building the only thing that could beat a woman who saw children as currency. A way to give without her ever getting to spend it. Sana connected me with a woman who set up education trusts. I explained what I wanted, and watched the attorney's face move from routine to interested. Real money for Julian. Enough for the welding program, and then some. Enough to launch a life. But locked. Held by a third party. Released only for verified educational and vocational costs. Paid directly to the school, the tool supplier, never as cash into anyone's hand. Not a dollar reachable by anyone but him. The one condition that matters, the attorney said, is that the beneficiary has to want it, and know about it. And it's best if his mother doesn't find out about the mechanism until it's already done. I understood. My weapon wasn't going to be louder than hers, or crueler, or more manipulative. I was going to give my brother something she could never turn into money. I texted Julian from the shop, and he called me back on his break, engine noise behind him. I told him the truth plainly, the way Ruth once told me the truth. The money was for her debts, not his future. Even over a bad phone line, I heard the news both hurt him and free him. The confirmation of something he'd half known his whole life. Then I told him what I wanted to do instead. Money set aside just for him. Locked, so no one could touch it but him. Only for the trade he actually wanted. He was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice younger than 19. Nobody's ever asked me what I wanted before. You're the first person who asked me what I wanted. I had to lean against the walk-in door to stay standing. 2 kids. One thrown out, one held too tight. And neither of us had ever once been asked. The night before the reunion, I sat with Ruth, who took my hand across the table and said, "You spent your whole life thinking you had to earn your way in here. Staying late. Fixing everything. Feeding everybody." She squeezed my hand. "But you didn't earn us. You don't get kept for being useful, Marin. You get kept for being ours." Walter had told me almost the same sentence, weeks before, wiping his hands like it was obvious. Now Ruth handed it to me a second time, as if the two of them had quietly agreed I'd need to hear it twice. "Because tomorrow," Ruth said, "that woman is going to tell you your worth is what you can pay. And I need you to already know she's wrong before you walk in that door." I drove the 3 hours one more time, in my good coat, with a cream envelope in my bag. Not a check. Something else. I'd chosen that exact shade on purpose, the color of wedding icing, so she'd see the envelope and think she'd won, right up until the second she opened it. The house was full when I arrived. Cars lined the block. Warm yellow windows. Corinne answered the door, and her face bloomed with triumph, because I had come. To her, that could only mean I'd folded. "Ren," she said, loud enough for the hall to hear. "You made it. Come in, everyone's dying to meet you." I stepped into a front room full of strangers who shared my blood and not one moment of my life. Dinner was a performance, and I was the guest of honor in a play I hadn't read. Corinne served Julian first, before Curtis, before the elders, an old reflex, older than either of her children. The son fed first, always. Nobody at that table thought it was strange. That was the part that chilled me. Not one of these warm, ordinary people saw anything odd in a mother who'd thrown away a daughter, and now beamed at her. It was an old great-aunt who cracked the door on Corinne without meaning to, telling the table how hard Corinne had it too, growing up the only girl among brothers, told plainly that a daughter's whole job was to marry well and produce sons. That a woman who couldn't produce a boy was a field that wouldn't take seed. I sat very still. Corinne hadn't invented the rule that discarded me. She'd been raised inside it. She'd been the unwanted girl once, and she'd swallowed that poison so young it became the water she swam in. I even felt it. The traitor pull of sympathy. But understanding is not absolution. A victim who becomes an enforcer is still an enforcer. And the boy at the end of the table was still being fed first, while his real life sat in a folder in my bag. Corinne stood, tapped her wine glass, and the table hushed. As many of you know, my Ren was raised elsewhere, and she's done so well. And she has generously agreed to help this family in our time of need. Especially her brother. She squeezed Julian's shoulder. He went stiff as a post. "Isn't that right, dear?" Every face turned to me, kind and expectant, waiting for the grateful daughter to confirm her generosity. I set down my fork. I stood. I reached into my bag for the cream envelope, and watched her face flood with victory, because to her, a woman reaching for an envelope at that table could only mean one thing. I didn't raise my voice. I've learned the person who stays quiet in a loud room becomes the only thing anyone can hear. "Not Julian's education," I said. "There is no college. Julian never enrolled anywhere. He'd like to learn a trade, and no one in this house has ever asked him. The $40,000 is for past due loans, and collections, and gift money promised at a wedding and never paid." I watched the warm room go cold in stages. "You ungrateful," Corinne started, climbing. "After everything I gave up for you." Ungrateful. The word that had ruled me my whole life. The word that says you owe. That your existence is a debt. 2 weeks earlier, it would have flattened me. Now, I already had a sentence in my chest, given to me twice. I opened the envelope. Not a check. Trust papers. I set them on the table where the light could catch them. "This is money set aside for Julian," I said. "Enough for the welding program he actually wants, and then some. It's held by a trust, managed by someone outside this family. It can only be released for his education, his tools, his training. Not for debts. Not for gifts. Not for anyone's reputation." I looked at Corinne. "It cannot be given to you. Or borrowed against. Or spent on anything but him. Ever." The room was dead silent. Julian stared at the papers like they were a language he'd waited his whole life to learn. "You can't do this," Corinne said, her voice cracking wide open, the mask gone completely. "I sacrificed my own child so you could have more. You owe this family. You owe me." I stayed in my chair, hands still on the table. "You didn't give me away, Corinne," I said. "You gave me back. There's a difference. And I finally know it." The room didn't gasp. It went stiller. The stillness of people watching a wall they'd always leaned on turned out to be a curtain. "I will not give you $1, I said. "Not now. Not ever. And this is the last time you'll see me." Then Julian did the bravest thing I saw all night. He picked up the trust papers, chair scraping back, and stood. "I want the welding program," he said, voice cracking, holding anyway. "That's what I want. That's what I've always wanted." Then, quieter, to his mother, she asked me, "Mom, Marin asked me what I wanted. You never did." It was the first time in that room that anyone had chosen me, the discarded one, over her. And it was the favored one doing the choosing. I didn't stay to be forgiven, or fought. I set the empty cream envelope on the table, its work finished, told Julian the attorney would call that week, and that he had a family now too, 3 hours away, that smelled like bread. Then I walked out, past the coats and the casserole dishes, down the steps Julian had carried his duffel down 2 weeks before, into a cold, clean evening. I did not look back at the house. I had spent 28 years looking back at that house, wondering if a light was on for me. Now I knew there had never been a light. Only a ledger. And I was finally, permanently, closing the book. My hands were steady on the wheel the whole drive home. Theo had the porch light on when I pulled in near midnight. I stood in my own doorway for a second, just to feel the difference between this threshold and the one I'd left. "So you did it," he said, later, after I told him everything. "You gave the kid a life. And gave her nothing." "Yeah," I said. "And I found out I'm not the one who was thrown away. I'm just the one who got out." Julian started the welding program that fall. He texts me pictures now, sparks and steel, and a grin that reaches his eyes, the real kind, no photographer counting to 3. Walter taught him to shape a loaf of bread once, and the sight of the two of them flouring a counter together is a thing I keep in the same pocket as the sentence Ruth gave me twice. Corinne never wrote again. I hear, through the thinned-out grapevine, that she still tells her version. That her ungrateful daughter turned cold and abandoned them. Some of them believe her. I've made my peace with that. The machine that discarded me still runs somewhere. I didn't dismantle it. I just stopped feeding it, and pulled my brother free of its gears, and made sure the account she opened when I was 3 years old would stay closed forever. Some debts you don't pay. Some debts were never yours to begin with. Nearly a year has passed since that table. Ren is 2 now. She stands on a stool at my elbow every morning, flour on her nose, patting dough with serious little hands, with absolutely no idea that she is the entire point of everything I did. I used to think they gave me back like a sweater that didn't fit. But you can't return a person. I just didn't know that yet, at 3 years old, in a too-fast coat, in a cold car. Ren will never learn that arithmetic. She will grow up in a house where nobody is fed first. Where love is not a bill. Where she is kept every single day for no reason at all, except that she is ours. That's the wall I built, in the end. Not the one that keeps Corinne out, though it does. The one that keeps Ren in, unconditionally, before she ever has to earn a single thing. She was born holding her place at this table. And on the morning she falls asleep in the flour bin, I look at her, and I understand, finally and completely, that I was always worth keeping. I just had to be the one to decide it. A cream envelope. A borrowed name. A table full of people waiting for me to fold. I didn't. If you've ever had to decide that love should never cost your whole self, if some doors are meant to close gently, and stay closed, then this table was set for you too. By the way, where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments, because it's amazing to see how far these stories travel around the world. Subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. I'll keep a seat warm, and the oven on, for you.